הדובר הבא שלנו הוא מר ג'ורג הינטליאן. ג'ורג הוא היסטוריון של ירושלים, והוא כתב וחקר רבות על תולדותיה של הקהילה הארמנית בעיר. כותרת הרצאתו היא לראיין את ניצולי הג'נוסייד הארמני 1970 עד 2000, והוא ידבר בשפה האנגלית.
Okay, I felt in honor of our distinguished guests from abroad, I wanted also to share in English the given subject. Now I consider here myself at home, but also a guest. And by the rules of hospitality, I'll speak 22 minutes instead of 20. But still, I will follow the discipline, thinking about that this subject is so difficult that I'll be drifting away, and I would like you to remind me about the time. 2 weeks ago, I became 70. And it's a full circle for me. And I'll be talking about too many full circles, including the Armenian-Israeli relationship. I've spent, I think, Yair, whom we thank, and Dr. Israel Charny for being with us, and we were together all the way. Yair defined that my interviews were from a certain chronological time. But of course, most of my interviews began in the 60s when I was a university student in Beirut, and probably from American University of Beirut, and probably my training dictated the way I look at it. I was a student of cultural anthropology and a student of philosophy. Philosophy gave me a certain way of, a certain outlook, especially about human nature and a certain discipline, while cultural anthropology gave me the drive and the curiosity. But there were two persons in my life whom some of you know, especially Raghib, Professor Dadrian, whom we consider as the father of Armenian history, genocide writing, the pioneer, and my father. My father made the full circle also. My father was from Cappadocia. He went on the death march. It was relatively different from the death march which the others didn't make from Eastern Turkey, where the purpose was anyway not deportations, but kill them on the way, fearing that they may come back. But those Armenians who have survived, including my father and some of the family, made the whole march to Aleppo. In the process, my grandfather was axed to death. My uncle, who was 4, was killed. And we have no pictures of the family. There is only one picture of the family. I don't know the faces, but I have 4 faces in the family which are published in books. One was a director of a school, one was a doctor, and my grandfather. My father was a fugitive in Aleppo, arrested many times, then decided to join as a medical to the Turkish special units, Yildirim. Then he worked for 1 year with the Germans in the tunnels, in labor battalions. And then from 1919-23, he became a British intelligence officer in Istanbul. And he was present, and he was an interpreter in the trial, if we may call it Nuremberg trials, the British style. So my father made all this way. He was an adult at the time. He was 18 when he started, and he was 24. So I think I had enough guidelines about what it meant to be a refugee or a participant. I quote a round figure, 800. It could be 100 less or 200 more. Especially my area, my field was in Beirut. I was a student, but also I went to the Armenian Quarter and to the old age homes, and I interviewed some of the people. Some of them quarter of an hour, some of them continuously on and on again. And then in my many travels all over the world, sometimes I would be one day in one city, but I would take 4 hours of a journey to find a certain person. But anyway, I'm not talking about morality and cruelty. When you are doing a study of or interviewing genocides, first I come from a different universe after interviewing so many people, although I'm not sentimentally affected, but basically at this point, I can't discuss you the whole panorama. It's difficult, although I've published recently one article talking about 20 cases. But it's out of question in a genocide to think, was this morality, was this cruelty? That's out of question, because suddenly a population is declared outlaw overnight, and the state declares almost a war on a civilian population defenseless. So I'm not guided by any moral criteria there, but I'm driven by curiosity. And beggars can't be choosers. I had no choice. I met anybody, I interviewed anybody. Some stories were dramatic. In the early 60s, we didn't have so many books. We didn't have a macro history of the genocide. We had Henry Morgenthau, we had Lord Bryce, we had some of the books of the missionaries. This year, for example, we had only this year published about 180 books. We can't compare the 60s, the level of knowledge of the 60s, with today. But I decided, Dadarian once took me to the side, and we are some kind of relative, and we come from the same town. He says, George, leave things aside, devote yourself to the genocide, and I listened to him. And it was not a bad choice. It was not so difficult, I tell you. People are saying, George, how can you carry so much of your memories? Because I did it, not because I was an Armenian, I would have done for any other genocide. And as I'm a leftist, I would do anything for any leftist cause. I think I was driven by curiosity. And although I've been an archivist, I'm not against archives. But basically, I believe in my private life, I've learned more through interviews than you learn through archives. People are excited today by getting to the Turkish archives. I think I'm not so much excited because the event or the definition is there, whether the archives say this or not. Because in modern academia, everything has to be quoted, everything has to be documented, and the ultimate answer is in the archive. But basically, I think our generation of scholars, at least in the Armenian case, also in the Holocaust, were lucky that they could ask their questions to the survivors. Because I think some people treat survivors as very superficial and very distorted, or late memories or improvements of memories. But basically, I made this full turn of all the genocides I remember. I have more or less, I would just give you a few examples. I think I was interested to meet, there's a curiosity there because suddenly you have a total of all these survivors. Then you are curious to find one case of one pattern, because basically interviewing survivors is you are trying not to establish patterns, but basically to see whether there were some repetitive patterns or there was a general policy or a local policy or whatever. Now, for example, there are many documented cases, but not so many also, especially in Lord Bryce, how in the areas which were on the Black Sea, they threw them by boats during the day and at night to the sea. So I had two cases whom I interviewed in detail, establishing this case. For example, in another area, there was a very effective way of elimination of a population of 100,000 in the area of Mush and Sassoon, where all the men, of course, were in the army. They came to village by village, and they collected the people in the barns, and 200 or 300 villages were burnt up in a matter of 2 weeks. Then I met a lot of people who were in the labor battalions, and of course, my main also subject was also what happened in Izmir. Do I know more than other authors? Perhaps I'm more convinced of the practices and of the patterns, and probably one day I should sit, because it was very difficult to tape these people, you know, because these people were suspicious or whatever. Then you had to take them. You have a whole psychology of moving around old people. You have to ask about his blood pressure, tell him, ask him what does he usually dream about, how are his children, and then at the end come to the story. So this is, in the end, it works. But before that, I had to do my homework. I had to know all the villages, all the towns, all the quarters, and I think many people feel more, connected with you when you tell him about the physical shape of his town or about some families. So this was an indirect help to know more about the geography of Western Armenia. I had to know the name of Bedouin tribes in Syria, Bedouin tribes in Karak or whatever. It was a whole education. But as we say, I think there is no standard way of definition saying that archives are less important or are definitive. They give the definitive answer to the Armenian genocide. Whether they decided, as one day Dadarian was telling me, I think considering the German case where every single thing was documented, in Orient they don't document so much. It takes several dinners or banquets among the key persons to agree orally what they will do. But still, of course, there are cables, etc., etc. Now, I think if there is the second case I'll be talking about is also by accident. In 1986, I came across 2 albums of pictures about the First World War in Palestine. I mean, this is not a secret. It's the American colony, with whose manager I was quite close. And then since '86, I've been investigating day-to-day life in Palestine in the First World War. Because so far, we have the official history. We have the official history of the British, Allenby and the rest. We have the official history of the Yishuv, and we have the official history of the Arabs. Now, not that I'll be going around the official history or I'll refute the official history, but I basically, because of lack of archives about the First World War in Palestine, I decided to go through interviews. And it was even during the first Intifada, it was difficult to move. I've been in many towns, many villages, and I've interviewed in the late 80s about 200 old people. And then I came to the books, then I came to journals. The picture here, I mean, we should admit, I mean, this is an area there are not so many historians. Israel and Palestine probably taken together, you have something like 10 historians, and more or less if you take them together, the body of knowledge is not so much. I mean, we have still need, I mean, still I don't care if the Turks open their archives or not. But basically, we get a picture which suddenly I found was complementary to what I was doing in an indirect way. Because here was one of the biggest centers of labor battalions. And the labor battalions were mainly in Sinai. I found out that tens of thousands of Armenians who were not sent to the front in other fronts, they were disarmed, they were sent in their thousands to the Sinai, and because of the conditions of the labor battalions, they simply died or disappeared. So this is the rest of the story. I mean, if we want to be a little Jewish here, I mean, as in the concentration camps, there was one journal, or two journals actually. There was one Arab who was saying today 200 musicians came. It may be an exaggeration. I found another journal who says today arrived a group where we found some musicians and we placed them in some of the tents of the Turkish officer. Whether music playing helps to survive is something else. But anyway, I think there is much to be done, and I may finish even before 20 minutes. There is not much to be done, and I think we have to, unfortunately, it's too late now to rethink about interviews. I think in America we have done in Boston and in California about 800, 1,000 quite systematic interviews, about 8 hours or whatever. And I think we have another 30,000 Armenian publications published until 1960, 70, which are memoirs of survivors. I think taken together, we can have a better picture. But now, I'm not so much interested in, because I move on. I think it's not a question that day and night I deal with survivors, but I have done it. But anyway, then you think about the good Turks. And my mother survived. She was from Konya, and you all know that the governor of Konya refused to carry out orders, and then he was suspended after 3 months. I found a character about whom we should devote a lot of literature in the person of Jamal Pasha, who can be considered, he was very hostile to the Arabs, he was hostile to the Jews, or to the Zionists rather, but he was not so hostile to the Armenians. And probably already the Armenian historiography is rethinking, it has taken him away from the trio, he's not part of the trio, and my research and the research of other people, I will add 2 minutes more now, will find that this man was not what we usually describe. So I hope one day I'll write a biography about him, and he deserves a biography. He could have been considered a monster, but he was very human in many ways. So I think that's a point, him and others. Now, but in the meantime, I think about the modern young people in Turkey. I've not been to Turkey, or I will not be in Turkey. I have met hundreds of young people, Turks and Kurds, abroad in conferences. They are also on this track of curiosity. But I was lucky to be in this country, because this country was an ideal place to meet Germans, Jews, and Armenians. And I could see the Germans going through this huge conflict I mean, I was close. I was very interested. I was, at the same time, reading as much about the Holocaust. But at the same time, I was meeting many Germans. And the Germans were so romantically attached once to this country. They were proud to say, oh, I've been 16 times, I've been 20 times. Any book about Jews was special. But basically, I admired that there is a new generation who had a deep conflict which is enduring in their life. Now, unfortunately, no Turk has said sorry to me in my whole contacts. And we have discussed, I said to them, do you feel sometimes it was wrong? They just say to me, you know, we are still studying the situation. We are weighing the situation. I went to Washington once to a meeting of MESA, Middle East Studies. There I found few women who were a little different from the general pattern. So I'm a little worried, as Mr. Raghib is worried about other things. We are all worried about democracy in Turkey. But basically, I think we have also, I consider Jews and Armenians are not the victims. The real victims are the Turks and the Germans. And as Leibovich once said to me, it is a German problem and it's a Turkish problem. So I think these are things which is not the place to discuss. Yesterday, I was very excited when 5 days ago we were in Ben Tukhmi, and I said, after all, it seems Tel Aviv is the academic capital of Israel, and it is. But something happened, I have to admit. When Yair was saying, Ani nirgash, I shared this with Harut. When I was in the reception yesterday, I broke down. I broke down seeing this huge crowd. This is the first time we are not helping, or one of the first times we are not helping for a project to take off. And this is the initiative, and I'm thankful for the Open University. But I said, why the 40 artificial years in the relations of the Armenians and the Jews in this country about the Armenian genocide, where we didn't deal neither with the Armenian genocide, but we dealt why and definitions. In Ben Tukhmi, I didn't agree with Yair that Israel denies the Armenian genocide. I said Israel is reserved about the Armenian genocide. But Israel, at one point, people like Shimon Peres became judges on world genocides, whether it was a tragedy or what. But now we are in a new stage. The ball is in your courtyard. I think there is a silent majority in Israel, which was silent all these 40 years, artificial years, which I justify in a way, because this was the time when there was a period of self-definition, what is Holocaust, whether it was unique or not. Now I think we have overcome that period because of maturity. Tel Aviv, in its university network, has reached its maturity to be universal. And I think nobody is any more bothered. We, as Armenians, consider the Holocaust, as unique. But still, on this forum, we are discussing Rwanda and we are discussing the Armenians. I think I personally, I'll retire. I'll retire from my initiatives. I've done what I can. And I think it's time to think between the Armenian public and the Israeli public that it's your turn to teach genocide and to do the rest. We'll be supportive of you, but we'll not take the initiative. I think we'll be helping Israel in this way to be more universal and to belong to the community of nations, and especially that we are twin brothers in genocide and Holocaust. Thank you.